name's Steve Shults. I'm so happy to be here today. And anyone that knows me knows how much I love church camp. Church camp is the best thing in the Church of God going today. I'm so sorry that none of you are able to physically be at church camp, and it's so important to do that for the fellowship, the camaraderie, and distancing yourself from the cares and concerns of the world for several days. Church camp is such a boost to you, and I'm sorry that you can't be there, but we're going to make the best of it. And we're going to talk about marriage. Marriage is something that's been talked about a lot of times when I was in church camp, and it's a very important subject, very important to the Church of God, because the Church of God takes a stand on marriage like it's supposed to, unlike other organizations that are around. So it's very important to understand the concepts of marriage and what goes on with marriage. Now, a little bit about me. I've been a member of the church since, well, more years than I care to remember. Long time. I come from a church background. Both of my grandparents were Church of God ministers, and so I never had a chance. And thank goodness, well, I'm a fortunate one. I'm privileged to have grown up in the church and love the church dearly. And when I was in church camp years ago, all of us that were in camp were very close to each other. And one summer we returned to church camp, and one of the young ladies that was our age had gotten married. And her marriage lasted only a matter of a couple of weeks or just a few weeks. And it was troubling because I knew the stand that the church took on divorce and remarriage. And I knew that if she had separated from her husband, what she would be facing for the rest of her life. And it troubled me. And so when I got home from church camp, I started reading the Bible. And I read the New Testament. I underlined everything that had anything to do with divorce and remarriage. Read it. Trying to find a loophole, I guess. Trying to determine exactly the situation she's in and what she might be facing. Well, all I discovered was the church is indeed absolutely spot on correct in everything they've ever taught. And there are ways to overcome, but it would be difficult for her. But it caused me to study the subject more and more throughout my life, which brings me here today. Now, in law enforcement, which that's all I've ever done in my life, I've been a cop pretty much my whole life, and policemen are visual. We like to be able to see things, look at them, and understand them that way. So we're real visual about things, so I'm going to try to bring a visual aspect to what we're doing here today. And then also on the law enforcement side, many years ago, like in the 40s, Arkansas had statute books. There were like 2 or 3 volumes of that thick. Now they cover about 3 or 4 shelves. But on the church side of things, we only have one book. And the law enforcement side has laws, and the biblical side has laws, but that set of laws hasn't changed, and they're standardized. They've been the same forever, and they'll always be the same. I've been involved in law enforcement training for like the last 15 years, and I'm responsible for training officers to do their job correctly and safely, and to get home at night and be safe. On this side, the stakes are even higher because on the law enforcement side, we're dealing with a lifetime. On the church side, we're dealing with eternity. So the stakes are a little higher on this side. So I have copious notes here, and I'm going to stick to them a little bit tight because I don't want to make any mistakes. Whether you're a member of the Church of God, doesn't matter. What I'm going to tell you is very important, and you need to understand it. As I look back on my life, nothing happens by chance. You can see God's hand in everything that goes on. Now, in the beginning, God created one man and one woman. Now, that's a whole different subject area than what we're going to talk about today. One man, one woman in the likeness of God. If you want to know what God looks like, look at man and woman. That's what God looks like. It's in his likeness. And, of course, he made man first, right? That's important, right? Interactive. God told both Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply the earth, and that's what brings us to marriage. Again, it's hard to be interactive by doing this on video, but let's just pretend we are, and you can be answering me and interacting the best you can under the circumstances. Now, what makes people married? What is it that makes people married? This is the interactive part. The wheels are supposed to be turning in your minds right now. What do you have to do to be married? What makes you married? What acts actually have to take place? Think about that just a minute. And it's also important that you have your Bible handy, because you need to write these verses down. The good thing about video is you can watch it again. So if you miss something, you can go back and pick it up. So that's one good thing about this. But the first verse I want to refer to, or verses, is Matthew 19, 4 through 6. Verse 4 says, "And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female?" There were but two options. Verse 5 says, "And said, For this cause shall man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh." And verse 6 says, "Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. And what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." Now, this brings us to our married couple. So, married couple, if you would join me in the luxury seats here, the blue ones. Again, I'm a visual kind of person. No, it doesn't matter. Yes, it does matter. I need you on that seat and you on that seat. Okay. Now, this is obviously a happy couple. You can see it on their faces that they are still in the newlywed phase, correct? But to visualize where a cop can understand it, I'm going to use these to symbolize how married they are. Now, these are a set of Peerless Handcuffs, and the Peerless Handcuff Company has been in business since, I think, 1912. This is the first set of handcuffs that the Peerless Handcuff Company ever made that's in pink and blue. And to avoid other confusion, and I doubt you can see it, but this one says husband, and this one says wife. So there's no confusion, right? Let's see. Okay, blue on this one, all right. I did bring the keys too, by the way.
I hope so.
And I'm not going to put them on terribly fast.
I hope not.
And I'll put you here. All right. They got married how long ago? Do you remember?
4 years.
How long?
4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
And still together doing fine. So they made this decision to get married. Now, I'm asking you at home where you're sitting, who married them? Who married them? I'll call your attention back to the verse I just read, which was Matthew 19 and 6, which says, "Wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh." The next part says it, and you'll notice it's in red. It's the words of Jesus Christ himself. Says, "What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." So there might have been a minister performing a ceremony, but the actual joining together of these two, attaching this, if you will, God did that. So we're going to say these are God's handcuffs right here. He put them on, they're there, and they're stamped. You can't get away. You're stuck. You are totally married, one flesh, joined together. And when, in our example, we're using handcuffs for the joining. He made them male and female. They left mommy and daddy. They became one flesh. And the biggie is that God joined them together. This was a supernatural occurrence because the maker of the universe is the one that put them together. He took time out of his busy schedule to make this couple one flesh. God did it. Man didn't do it. Might have helped in the ceremony, but the actual joining together was done by God himself. So, that's very important. Only God Almighty has that power to turn a male person and a female person into one flesh. Man can't do it, only God can do that. Back to Matthew 19 and 6. There are no more twain, they're not two people, but they're now one flesh. It's red letters. Jesus said this. It comes on good authority because it's Jesus Christ himself that said this is the way it happens. So then, in man's world, and I used to sit in court and divorce court all the time, where a husband and wife was sitting in court and a judge makes a decision to give them a divorce. Now, on Judgment Day, I would be terrified to stand before God and tell him that I, as a human being, made any attempt to try to tamper with anything he put together in the first place. First of all, I can't. Because this is on, and we'll get deeper into that in just a minute. These are on for the duration of their lives. So, man doesn't have any right to tamper with this in the first place. In law enforcement, we often find people on the highways that are not exactly in the best physical condition due to impairment from some kind of substance, a pill, something out of a bottle or whatever. And we often give a breath test, and to determine whether or not any time during these people's lives, if they're still married, all you got to do is give them a breath test. And this breath test is simple, because if they have a breath, they're still married. No matter what. No matter what. Romans 7 and 2 says, "For the woman which hath a husband is bound by the law to her husband so long as he liveth. And if he lives, he breathes." So all you got to do is put a little mirror in front of his face. It gets fog on there. He's breathing, so they're still married. Now, if he's dead, she's loose from the law, and loosened from the law of her husband. So death is the only thing that can separate them. Now it's interesting that the Bible uses the verbiage of making them one flesh. Flesh is what the integumentary system is, the flesh of our bodies. It's what surrounds our bodies and holds everything in place. And when someone dies, that flesh immediately starts to deteriorate and decay away. So that's consistent with marriage. Once they die, that flesh deteriorates away, so you're no longer one flesh because that other flesh dissolves away. It rots away. Another thing in law enforcement, you have the unpleasant opportunity to be around these situations. It's very unpleasant. But flesh goes away and deteriorates rapidly. Okay, so if God Almighty himself made man and woman one flesh, and Jesus said for man not to tamper with the union, and it did, because what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. We were told, Jesus told us not to mess with a marriage. We have no authority, no right whatsoever to mess with a marriage. We can go to court, and here's what happens when you go to court and get a divorce. From our local Walmart store, I have some fine example of camouflage right here. Good stuff. It was advertised to be sold as a bandana, I think. But we're going to say that they've been to court and they got a divorce, and here's all the court did. They just camoed it up a little bit. Nothing's changed. There's still cuffs under there. They're still as married as they ever were. And man has no right, no authority to remove those cuffs, to dissolve this marriage. All they did is cover it up. So if either one of them goes off and gets married again, they get into an adulterous situation. We don't want that. Man does all kinds of things to try to make marriage go away. You can go to divorce. Some organizations have a process by which we're just going to say it never really happened in the first place, but it did. You can't undo what's done. 1 Corinthians 7, 10, and 11 says, "And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband, but if she departs, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, and let not her husband put away his wife." Now, if you were here at Interactive, I would have you repeat that part, let her remain unmarried, if for some reason you separate. Unfortunately, we live in a day and time where things happen that should never happen. He could become a wife abuser. He could hit her. He could hurt her. He could threaten her. He could do bodily harm. And since we're in an age where women have women's rights, it could be her doing that to him. So there may come situations where two people physically cannot tolerate living with each other. Because of these things, there is a provision for separation, but not remarriage, because they may separate physically, but those cuffs under there, under that camouflage, they're still linked because they're still breathing. You can give them the breath test. If they're alive, they're breathing, they're married, they're still married. Nothing's changed. It's still death do you part. That's part of the marriage ceremony. Divorce is not God's will. It was never meant to happen. It's a hard thing, and it was never, ever meant to be. If you can be divorced and remain unmarried, it's hard in this day and time, but you can still make it to glory under those circumstances. The remarriage part's what's known as adultery, and adultery is on the top 10 statute list, or the 10 Commandments. It's number 7. And adultery is a problem of eternity. You can't, if you're in an adulterous situation, you're never going to make it. To remain unmarried after the separation process certainly will require the Spirit of God in your life. And Galatians 5 and 16 says, this I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. That's the only way. You need the Spirit of God in your marriage no matter what, but if there's a problem in your marriage, you definitely need the Spirit of God to get you through the remainder of your life. Now, there's all kinds of excuses out there in the church world, other organizations. Many organizations try to accommodate certain behavior and still let you make it. Rather than guide you to the straight and narrow, they kind of let you drift off as far as you can and get by. That's dangerous to do. I grew up with my best friend in school, and we had discussions on this very subject a lot of times. And what he would say is, God can forgive anything. And his intention in that thought was that if they got divorced and remarried, God could forgive that whole situation and everything's fine. You all have kids? You have kids? How many?
Yeah,
One. All right. Let's say I'm a kidnapper and I steal their boy or girl? Boy. And I steal their son. I run off with the baby. How old is it? 9 months. Still a baby. I run off with the baby. I can say, Lord, forgive me of stealing this baby. And he will. Do I get to keep the baby? Just because he forgave that sin of me stealing the baby? It doesn't make the baby mine, does it? Neither would, if they got divorced and got remarried, neither would that person be their wife because those handcuffs never left, because they're still breathing. They stay on there till somebody dies. Y'all still breathing, right? Still married, handcuffs are good. So, the fact that you get forgiveness for maybe a divorce or remarriage situation, you got to put away those things that are inconsistent with the fact that they're still one flesh and get back on straight and narrow. Another excuse out in the world, and they confuse this with fornication, which we'll talk about more in a minute, was that my partner was unfaithful to me, therefore I'm entitled to remarry. Now, I don't know who came up with that doctrine. Sounds okay. I mean, there's a good excuse there, right? Not good enough, though, because these are till death do you part handcuffs. I'm going to remove the camo now, because we know they're under there. We won't be able to see those fine, peerless pink and blue handcuffs. Still locked, still married. But my partner's unfaithful. Well, there's a lot of scripture in the Bible concerning divorce and remarriage, and this very item is covered plainly. Let's say she started running around on him, and he's heartbroken and everything, and she's out with someone different every night, and we have a name for that, right? If somebody's out a whole lot with a lot of different people, we have a name for that. Well, the Bible covers that subject. Know ye not, this is 1 Corinthians 6 and 16, know ye not that he which is joined to a harlot is one body. They're still one flesh. Says it right here, 1 Corinthians 6:16. Know ye not, he which is joined to a harlot is one body. For two, saith he, shall be one flesh. They're still one flesh, no matter what. All right, so if she would be considered a harlot for all her running around, and she's still breathing and he's still breathing, the breath test goes, they're still one flesh. All right, time for another breath test. 1 Corinthians 7 and 39, 1 Corinthians 7:39 says, the wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if the husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. Now, everyone's probably heard that the Church of God has been accused of being legalistic. Well, God has laws, and it would behoove us to follow those laws, and if that means being legalistic, count me in, because I think following them is the wise thing to do. You just heard a New Testament law that's still in effect. I have no problem with the church supporting the Word. If it didn't, it wouldn't be the church, so that's where we want. If at times it seems the church supports something not clearly defined in the Bible, it's probably done for your safety to try to get you to the straight and narrow in the center. Now there's the fornication loophole. This is the loophole of all loopholes in divorce and remarriage, which may seem complicated, but it's really not. Enter the third party. Oh, third party. Oh, third party. Oh, third party.
Sorry.
Have a seat over here in the hard brown chair. Okay. Enter the third party. Now, these cuffs are still bound. Third party, you've never been married, have you? Never been married? She's free, guys. Free advertisement here. All right. In the unlikely event, which is not going to happen, but let's say that this happy couple became unhappy, went to court, court puts the camo back on, he sees her and has a ceremony performed, a marriage ceremony with quotations, and I want you just to hook pinky hooks there, and they got married. All right. She has never been bound by those handcuffs. She has never been married and is eligible to be married. His handcuffs are still attached because Jesus said what God has joined together that man can't put asunder. So they're still hooked up. So he is in a situation of being in adultery if he gets a ceremony with her. She is in a situation of fornication because she has never been married, she's never been one flesh, and she is with someone which is ineligible. Now that sounds complicated, but Matthew 5 and 32 says, whosoever shall put away his wife, in her case, or that's his case, his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. Whosoever marry her or him that is divorced committeth adultery. She has never looked, you can unhook now, because they're not really married anyway. Can't be married, because he's bound to her. she cannot be married to him because he's still one flesh. If she had a ceremony performed on this earth where a preacher said they were husband and wife, in God's eyes they're really not, because he's still husband and wife, or he's still husband and she's his wife. They're still one flesh. So she has never been united by God himself and become one flesh with anyone, because she has to first pick someone that is eligible. So then she is still free to marry because she has never been one flesh with anyone. God has never made her one flesh with anyone. So that's where fornication comes in. I'm going to read this verse again. Matthew 5:32. Whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever marry her that is divorced committed adultery. And the verse that really clears this up is 1 Corinthians 7:2. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. She had somebody else's. She didn't have hers. So to avoid fornication, she would need to find her own husband who has never been physically united with someone else. So she's still eligible to marry. I hope that's clear. To avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, let every woman have his own husband. Two people that have never been married can become one flesh. That's the only way. They've been married, they're one flesh. She cannot become one flesh with him because he's already been married. He is already one flesh. So she has to find someone that has never been married to become one flesh with that person. So to avoid fornication, let every woman have her own husband. Okay. And if this was interactive, I'd have all the men out there say, let every man have his own wife, and have all the women say, let every woman have her own husband. So y'all can say that. I'm listening. Okay, I think we got it. Now, is life easy? No. We have all kinds of complications. Every day's not been perfect and happy, has it? Many years ago, when I was in church camp, we had a brother from India named Brother Joseph. He was the best volleyball player you've ever seen in your life. He could serve that ball and go over that net and nobody could return it. Very good volleyball player. But Brother Joseph would tell us about life in India, and at that time, life in India, all the marriages were prearranged. Your mom and dad didn't pick you out for each other, right? No, you did that on your own. And it worked. Amazing. It works. But in India at that time, the parents selected the spouse. They selected who their son or daughter would be married to. And I talked to another Indian not long ago who was a real estate agent in Memphis, Tennessee, and he told me that in India they've gotten away from that nowadays, where the man and woman have more liberty to pick their own spouse. And he said it hadn't worked out as well. He said the divorce rate in India has gone way up with them picking their own, more so than it did when the parents picked the husband or wife. Which made me understand that they're not working at it. Because then, are you okay? To cutting off circulation?
We're good.
Okay.
I just wouldn't want to do anything bad to get real ones.
Okay. But apparently they don't work as hard at it in India now. But you have to work at marriage. It's not. I mean, we're humans. Humans don't get along. 4 people on earth and we've had a homicide and need a cop, right? We had it. 4 people on earth have had a homicide. So humans don't generally get along that well all the time. Neither do husbands and wives. So it's a job. You have to work at it, and you have to try and strive to make things work in the marriage, to make a marriage good. Now, we've talked about this stance on divorce and remarriage, and guess how many churches out there take this biblical stand besides the Church of God? This is where crickets come into play. I need visual. I need crickets. Should have went to Walmart and got some bait. Let the crickets chirp right now, because you'll have a hard time finding one. That's one thing that really separates the Church of God from others. if you go where anyone else tells you anything different than this, they're not interested in your eternal situation as much as they may be interested in something else, which is tragic. It's a hard truth. Many churches are filled with people who are living in adulterous situations, which is a sad thing. Our nation is in the shape it's in because of wrecked homes. When I would sit in court and watch, this was back in my sheriffing days, when I sit in court and watch divorce cases, I would see the faces, and that's why I don't like this kind of teaching, because I want to see your body language, I want to see your faces, I want to see your eyes, I want to see your reaction. But I'd see the reaction of little kids in divorce court, and it was tearing them, it was ripping their hearts in half. It was destroying them. And it happens all the time, every day of the year in this country, and it happens over and over and over. Many times, it's multiple times for the same kids. They grow up confused, not understanding, no stability. What better shape our country would be in had we took a stand, if other churches had took a similar stand as the Church of God concerning divorce and remarriage. Matthew 7:21 says, "Not everyone saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven." It's not God's will that any marriage separate. It's his will when they become one flesh that they remain one flesh until the day they either or both pass away. If you're already married, or when you get married and temptation comes along, do like the master law enforcement officer does, that'd be Barney Fife, and nip it in the bud. All of these marital problems, all of these temptations, all of these battles start right here in your head. The war takes place right here. The decisions to go wrong, to step aside, to fail, start in the mind before there's ever any physical activity occurs. You make that decision right here, so that's where the battle's fought, and that's where you've got to win the battle. So take proactive steps to not let those temptations enter in. Mark 7:15 says, "There's nothing from without a man, anything from outside of you, that entering into him can defile you." Nothing from the outside can enter you and defile you, according to Mark 7:15. "But the things which come out of him, those are which defile the man." The heart and the mind, that's where you get in trouble. That's where the battle takes place. That's why law enforcement has such a hard time defeating crime and criminal activity, because the decisions are made in their heads, and it's kind of hard for law enforcement to roll up in a police car and get inside somebody's head and fix it before they do something, because it happens here before it does otherwise. And going a little longer than I thought it would, so I'm going to end this with a quote from my grandfather, Daniel Melvin Shults, who was a former state overseer in Arkansas. And his favorite verse of the Bible was John 13:17. And that verse simply says, "If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them."